Welcome to Outer Space, International Arts and Class Struggle Podcast.
Organising under a banner of solidarity in the contemporary art economy. An interview with Calum Baird. Hello, I'm Rob MacDonald and I am your host for Outer Space International Arts and Class Struggle podcast. This podcast is part of a series of podcasts that we are doing related to the historical memory of the Spanish Civil War, particularly the Solidarity Park project. So we're going to be talking to lots of artists involved in that project. What are their reasons to be involved? How do they see the fight against fascism and the far right today? But also their general political outlook, and touching on many of the questions that the podcast normally talks about. We're also going to make a bit of investigation into the role of women in the struggle for the historical memory today, the recuperation of the memory. We'd also like to thank the Diputació de Barcelona and Amicel, the International Brigades Association in Catalonia, for their support in this project. Okay, let's go to the podcast. Hello, today I'm joined by Calum Baird, Calum Baird. Sorry about that. I managed to muck up your name in the first sentence. How you doing, mate? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm good. How you doing, Rob? It's good to see you.
Yeah, great. Thank you for joining us. We've invited you onto the show because you've been part of the Solidarity Park project. You played, I think, a 30-minute set at the last,
That's
maybe
right.
it was a little bit longer than that, at the last festival we did. An excellent set it was. And what we want to do today is to get to know you a bit better, get some of your opinions, and ask you hopefully some interesting questions for the listeners. So that's who I think you are, more or less. Who are you actually? and you're from Scotland, yeah? But whereabouts in Scotland are you based?
So I'm from central Scotland in a town called Falkirk. I'm a singer-songwriter and a musician. I've been doing this for about a better part of 10 years maybe now. I think I went officially sort of into music as I was going to say a means to life, but I don't know if that's accurate, but as a sort of job, if you like, in 2013, after working in a part-time job just in a shop. I did a couple of gigs and really enjoyed the gigs I did. I could get paid for it and thought this is a much better use of my time, and it just started from there when I was 18 or 19, something like that, can't quite remember, something like that. And then I began writing my own music, releasing music, and haven't really looked back, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So for a whole number of years now you've been professional, basically.
Yeah, I suppose.
So which circuits do you play? I mean, do you just do... I mean, obviously music's political and we'll come on to that.
Sure.
But I'm kind of interested in the scene in Falkirk or in Scotland. I mean, you're a singer-songwriter, so you're a guitarist and a vocal, yeah? Yeah,
that's right, yeah. So, I play... I do a variety of different gigs in Scotland. There's not much of a political music scene. Where there is attempts to try and create one, which I'm part of here in Scotland, but mostly in Edinburgh. We're trying to create one, but obviously COVID keeps popping up and posing an obstacle to that, so that's quite difficult. There was one sort of emerging round. There was a sort of art, not just music but art scene emerging round about the sort of Jeremy Corbyn period, with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership at that period in the Labour Party. But obviously with that going, and that obviously going at the same time as COVID struck, it's been really hard to build anything more than just a gig here or there at this point in time. But I play. I play a variety of different gigs. I play in bars and restaurants. I sometimes play as evening entertainment in restaurants. But I do tours of Europe. I've played in Spain. I've played in Madrid and Barcelona. I've played in Portugal. Played in Lisbon at the Festa do Avante festival, which is organised by the Portuguese Communist Party and the Young Communists, Portuguese Young Communists. I've played in Germany. I've toured around Germany. So in 2019, I toured south to northeast, and then this year I toured from northeast to south. So I did it the other way around with the German Left Party for their election campaign. 2019 was for the European Parliament elections, and then this year was for the German Parliament elections. And I've played at various different festivals in Germany as well. Actually, I've got two really great friends in Berlin. They're brothers, Tobias Thiele and Florian Thiele. They run their own sort of agency artist label called Redhead Music, and it means two things. One, because they're ginger, and two, because they're on the left. So it's a very clever name for their agency, and they helped me organise some gigs and performances in Berlin, but in Germany as well. So they helped to organise the tour with Die Linke that I performed on, and they've also booked me to play at sort of so there's a festival in Berlin which hasn't taken place because of COVID, and I'm not actually sure if it's going to come back at all, but it's called Festival Music und Politik. I think I've got that right. It might be Festival der Musik und Politik, sorry. And it's sort of it's could trace its lineage back to the DDR days. It's when the DDR used to have a festival of political song in February and June. So it could trace its history back to then, and it was called I don't want to say what it was called in case I get it wrong, but it was after the wall fell, the festival kept going, but it changed its name, and then that changed its name to Festival der Musik und Politik. So I played at that in 2017 and 18. I performed at that. And that's a great festival. It's an international festival. It's music, it's poetry, there's some film, there's some live sort of art performances as well. So I really hope that they can bring that back if there's an appetite to bring it back. I hope that can be achieved. And I've also played in Dortmund at it's the German Communist Party's festival at the it's in a park in central Dortmund, and I've just totally forgotten the name. It was there, and now it's just gone. So that's organised every 2 years in Dortmund by the German Communist Party, and it's a great festival. Something like 20 to 50,000 people attend it over the weekend, and again it's quite international, and probably very international. It's got a whole tent dedicated to Cuba and Cuban music and Cuban and Latin American culture, actually, not just Cuban culture but Latin American culture, and there's a various different stages. There's a book festival takes place as well, and there's lots of little like red statues of Karl Marx dotted all over the place, which are good fun. I play, though that's the sort of gigs I do. I wouldn't say I'm a gun for hire. I suppose I do have some limits. There are some places I won't play, and there are some people or venues, if you like, that I won't play for here. Maybe because they're bad employers, or they've got a bad ethos about them. I won't name names because I don't want to get the podcast into trouble, but there have been some who have approached me, a bar saying, can you come and play, or a bar chain asking me to come and play, and I've had to say no because I don't agree with your companies. So I play in a variety of places.
If you've named them, we don't need to. The podcast is about class struggle and music and art. So maybe we'll do another one if it comes around to outing bad employers of musicians.
All I'll say is don't drink BrewDog. That's all I'll say.
Okay, I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. This brings us on really. you don't do you just play political gigs, or do you do other stuff as well? Is it just or you stick with the political stuff in the main?
No, I do other things as well. I mean, I play singer-songwriter slots in Edinburgh and Glasgow and around about Scotland. I've played at some folk festivals here. I've played at some music festivals here as well. Some sort of art festivals. You know, they're more sort of music, but they do have poetry and stuff. Yeah,
but the political stuff is the driving force of connected to your art. Would you say? I mean, it sounds like you listed off a lot of places.
Yeah, I mean that's really important to me as a musician. The music I listened to when I was younger and when I was beginning to write was quite political and quite solo singer-songwriter. So Phil Oakes, Billy Bragg, but Neil Young as well, and Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie. People like that sort of Joan Baez as well. People like that are Victor Hara as well is a great influence on me. Even though we don't do anything very similar, I like his ethos and his politics, and I find it very inspiring. I've actually got a Victor Hara sticker on my guitar case. So
very good. Very good.
So I'm very moved by people like that, and these are the people I listen to, and I like the, you know, someone like Billy Bragg. He's not just political, but he's got very good, like, sharp social commentary sometimes that I quite like, and yeah. So those are my main influences.
On all that, really, you're quite a natural fit for Solidarity Park, eh? And not just the monument and the International Brigades, which we'll come on to in a bit later in the podcast, but also, you know, the music festival idea that we're pushing towards, because you mentioned COVID a couple of times there. Obviously, the first two festivals of Solidarity Park have been online. The last one a little bit less than the first one, with some live stuff, and we had more singing. Like we had the 30+ minute set from yourself, rather than one before was just even less live, if it can be less live. But of course, the next one in May we're looking at being live, and so you're a natural fit to the project, with all the stuff that you do, the political singing you do, and your politics. You know, I mean, are you politically active beyond the music, or do you see your music as your activism? How do you? Because for me,
that's a good question.
The two things run in a really weird way. You know, I'm quite interested to hear other artists. How does that work for you?
I have been politically active in different ways. I've been like a paid organiser for a party in the past. I've been members of a couple of different political parties, members of a couple of different trade unions as well. I'm a member of the Musicians Union. I'm now a member of Living Rent, which is a tenants association. But you know, I've sort of dabbled in bits and pieces here, go to demonstrations, trying to organise people to come to demonstrations and stuff like that. But mostly in recent years, like you say, my music has been where that's been, I guess, my contribution, if you like. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but that's been the way I've tried to do my activism. I think that I've noticed that there are people who can handle the organising thing better than I can, who can get people to respond to them, to come to a protest or come to a demonstration or organise a workplace or something like that, who could do these things more effectively than me. But for writing music and performing music, I feel something in myself when I'm performing to these gigs, that I feel like that's something that I can actually do and bring. And not only that, I can sort of, you know, the left is quite a broad spectrum, even though it's quite a broad spectrum. So I feel like my music allows me to sort of cross that spectrum a little bit. Whereas if you're just a party organiser for this party, you are kind of hemmed in a little bit, or some people might not trust you because they think you're coming from a really sectarian angle, whereas when you're a musician you can cross that. And I've got comrades in various parties and in a couple of different unions, and it helps me to really sort of speak to people and find out what's going on. And actually, you know, if I'm writing a song, it's 90% of the time it's something that's happening in my head, and then you go out and perform it, you get a feedback from the audience from that, and you can find out from people. It's a very folk songwriter way of working. Actually, you speak to people and you find out what's going on, and you incorporate that into your music. And you can you could do that as an organizer, but to only to an extent, I think. Yeah.
I mean, folk music is, it's folklore, isn't it? It's connected to the oral history of mankind. Let's put it that way. And I think it's exceptionally important. And singer-songwriters very much are in that vein. There are other ways, spoken poetry and whatever. I particularly like your take on that, Calum. I didn't know what you were going to say to that question. I would agree with you. I've also got a past, and I think there's something that artists. Some people say, "Oh, you're just an artist, get out there and do some activism and stuff like that." Right, mate. Do you know what I've done? Do you know what I do most of the time? I mean, Solidarity Park, they think I'm a sculptor. I'm actually it's like being an organizer, a party organizer of some description. And I think I don't know what you think to this, but I think there's a lot of work to be done on the left. There always should be. We should never be lazily about the task we have in trying to change society. But one of the problems we do have is we hate each other more than we hate the Tories sometimes, or we hate the bosses. And of course we don't. And there's so much power in our unity. But overcoming that, I think artists have got a real important role to play that, just because the nature of how art comes from us, not as an individualist thing, because they think, art's an individualist thing. Actually, art's I don't know how you think about it, but certainly my art forms, I think collectively, immediately. I think about, obviously it's coming from me, it's from my heart, and it's from my brain, it's from I'm the lens as the artist. But I always think immediately, how do I get others involved in this art project? How do I I mean, so it sounds like we're on the same page as that. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, one person I forgot to mention who's been a big impact on my music is Dick Goguen, a Scottish folk singer-songwriter who's on the left. I'm sure people will have heard of him. There's a great video of him on YouTube talking about political song and what it means to be a political songwriter, political artist. And he says that when he's writing music, he thinks first of all about what he's trying to say, and then who he's trying to say it to, and who he's trying to say it for. And not only that, if he's writing a song that's maybe got a negative tone, maybe it's a song about unemployment or a song about war, he doesn't just try to lay out the negative. He tries to, even if it's the last line in the song, he says he tries to leave a positive there, so that there's something that people can actually, or people, but especially people on the left, can actually take away as a lesson from the song. So it's not just a song saying everything's crap, I don't like it, we're all doomed. He tries to paint a full. He talks as if in his music he tries to paint a full picture when he's writing and singing. It's not enough to simply say everything's bad. You have to say there's bad, but here's what could be different, or things are bad, but I'm looking forward to a better future, or something like that. It's quite simple. But that's a very simple idea. But trying to make that into an artwork is, and that's where
I can think of two diversions from that, or diversions is the wrong way, but one is that really negative music can sometimes make me feel really positive. And sometimes people think something's negative when they really haven't read it properly. So for example, some people think Leonard Cohen's negative and he's the most positive singer in your heart when you really get what the guy's, it's love basically all the way through from beginning to end. But if you hear him without, thinking about it, sometimes it goes that way. That's the one thing. And the other thing that hits me with what you're saying was historical memory is very much one of the strands of Solidarity Park projects. It's one of our key things. Historical memory, not just for history's sake, but for the fight today against fascism and the far right. And what you seem to be saying there is, we have a task of telling a story, and an interpretation of not just history but at present day at the same time. And I think art forms can do that, can't they?
Well, yeah. I think that's. I said earlier about how music gives me a means to life, but actually, I kind of didn't want to say that because it kind of sounds like you're reducing art to just money and paying for things. But I think art gives a means to life in that it provides people with a clarification and a validation sometimes. You know, I went just last week, I went to see Spider-Man in the cinema, and that's massive pop culture. We could probably agonise all day whether it's bourgeois or not, but the fact of the matter is that the cinema was quite busy, and there was people, I won't give away spoilers in case any of your listeners are massive Spider-Man fans, so don't worry, but there was people whooping and cheering at different points in the film, not just when a certain actor did something or a certain character appeared, but at like really, you know, emotional points in the film. And that's because these films, although they are massive blockbusters that make billions for already rich studios, there's something there that people can relate to. They can relate to someone trying to, you know, in the case of Spider-Man, his alter ego Peter Parker, he tries to do everything all at once, and he also tries to be Spider-Man, and people can relate to that, trying to have various different strands in their life. And when they see that on this cinema, it sort of justifies and clarifies things like, oh, okay, so, you know, people can see how art gives a clarification to their life, gives it a validation, explains things. And I think in the context of the far right and fake news and conspiracy theories, I think that's like a really important thing about art. I'd say in general, but it's right now, given the threat of fascism, I think we need to have like a broader scope than just what the left can do. But I think the left has to have its own culture, its own discourse, obviously, but to add to the wider discussion. But I think art in general, as long as it's anti-fascist art, of course, or has an anti-fascist sort of message to it, art in general is quite powerful at counteracting these quite heinous ideologies that are out there in society right now. Very poisonous, very dangerous, creating a lot of harm. There's something like 6 million people in the UK are not getting vaccinated for various reasons. I'd say a big chunk of them are influenced by nonsense theories that Bill Gates and the lizards are trying to take over, or something of that variation. And I think art could play a part. It's an interesting one. Yeah, definitely, I think art could play a role, and you know, people get bored of politicians lecturing them, but sometimes as if an artist has a song or a music video or a painting or a sculpture or a poem, it can tap into people much better than, I don't know, Joe Biden speaking for 6 hours. Again,
you're saying a couple of very interesting things there that we could follow up with. Is to choose which one, really. I mean, I think there's the general analysis you had there of art, which I think is interesting, you know, and the left having its own subculture within that. I think you were kind of alluding to that a little bit, which I think is something interesting to talk to. But before we go into that, maybe you talked about money, and this is a big problem. Problem's the right word, because I mean, my personal opinion is I can't choose to do any art form that makes money. But because I live in a capitalist society and I'm working at that, I believe that I should be paid for it at the same time. So I have this contradiction. If I take a job for the money, you know, when it connected to art, I do teaching, I don't mind doing that, I don't mind building brick walls, you know, that somehow feels all right. But when capitalism encroaches in art, and art for me is such a critical factor to being free and being a human being, that when I go chasing that for money, it's difficult. But it was interesting you say that, because when I was thinking about my youth earlier, because I used to play music, I was a drummer. I haven't played for years now.
Okay,
I had no problem in mind of getting paid with those gigs. But when I'm doing the monument, I mean, the truth is I've less than broken even on the monument from a personal point of view, far less, but that's another matter. But also Solidarity Project, we're looking at professionalising. We want to bring people, we want to eventually pay people, but we do rely on the spirit of voluntary sort of left activism to carry us to that point. and there's it's almost I'm going on a bit here, but because it's an important issue for me, and I'm interested in your opinion. That we're always in this constant crisis within capitalism. It's almost like a question of reform and revolution for artists. Do they stick to their guns, their principles? Do they do art for arts for the power of art, or is it a job? And that cut-off point is really sort of never easy to define. So I'm interested, first of all, what's your take on that?
I think it's a really challenging. It's something that's always been an issue for art, actually. For art and artists, is whether or not it's this massive blurring between work, or actually no, a massive blurring between labour and life, or labour and leisure. And at what point does a drawing that's just a sketch suddenly become worth £1 million or whatever? Or when does an artist who's sketching something think, oh, I quite like that, I'm going to put that on my website and see if somebody wants to buy it? It's the constant question. I think there's a great contemporary Marxist writer who I've read a lot of his work lately. Dave Beach. It's Dave and then BEECH Beach. He's a lecturer, he's a reader in Marxism and art at the University College of London, I think, or I think that's the one he's at. And he in his book, so he's got two books. He's got one that came out in 2019, which is I would recommend trying to get a hold of. You can get it on Pluto Press for about a tenner. It's really good. It's called Art and Post-Capitalism, and it talks a lot about aesthetic labour and what it is, and tries to explain it, and it tries to explain it in a way that he makes a point that art is very automation resistant. I know this sounds like I'm going on a tangent, but I'm trying to come back to it. He makes a point that artistic labour is very automation resistant, and so he's critiquing post-capitalist theories by people like Paul Mason and Aaron Bastani, who say that we'll live in a society where robots do all the work and humans will just leisure. Dave Beach makes a point that artistic labour isn't like this. It doesn't fit into these models of post-capitalism, and actually he points out that artists have themselves struggled with this idea of labour and leisure, and who does the work and who doesn't do the work. So there's that book by Dave Beach, but he has another one, and I think it's called Art and Labour, and it's from 2015, and that one, chapter 2 in that book is the one I read, and I think it's called something like the economics of art, something like that, and he does a really, really detailed look at people who say that art is bourgeois, who say that it's intrinsically capitalist, it's a capitalist profession. He looks at that and he breaks it down using a very, very disciplined, I would say, very organised Marxist analysis of art in the context of the labour theory of value. And he looks at art in the various different stages and forms of capitalism, and I would recommend people check that out, because that really does answer a lot of these questions. But I think in terms of money, I think actually something in music, I'll just use the example of music because that's the one I'm most familiar with. Asking for a fee, or more or less demanding a fee, actually is still the norm. The issue is not getting paid what the labour is worth. You still have to haggle. There's still some places out there that will try to get you to do a gig for less than £100 and want you there for 3 hours, want you there an hour before to set up, and will try to get you to do gigs like that. There's still people in the labour movement who think that you're just a jukebox in the corner and a couple of pints and a packet of crisps will do, and they want you to travel all the way across the country to go and do this work. So there's still these debates to be had, but in art, between artists themselves, there are different sort of economising practices that they engage in that don't really involve money, and I think that's becoming quite common. So you'll see artists who maybe they maybe apply to a fund to make a film, and what they do is they get the money from that fund, and then they give it to other artists, so that so that they're spreading out the money, or they do a thing called downshifting, which is basically a form of dumpster diving, I suppose, where they get really cheap material and sort of upgrade it and use that for their art. So I can think of musicians who maybe scour for hours on eBay or Gumtree trying to find a guitar, and then rather than going and buying it brand new, they get it for cheap and then they upgrade it themselves. There's that, I guess you would call that thrifting. There's also artists who maybe live in a city centre and then they leave and move somewhere cheaper, and there's all these sort of different things that artists are doing right now to try to not necessarily subvert capitalism, but try to like mitigate its worst impulses of consumption and pure like profiteering, and I think these are becoming quite common, and something that we need to look into as artists as well, and how we can and commoning as well. That's obviously one that we don't really talk about, but artists who just share work together and nobody really gets paid, but you might do a film and ask me to do the music for it, and then I might say to you, okay, can you edit this film that I've made, and then that way we're both doing something, but we're not really getting paid for it. We're not getting paid for it, but we can both put out a project that can be, we could both still do our art. We're not being limited by financial resources, and that's something that's becoming quite more common. Commoning is becoming more common amongst artists, and I think these are things, alternative economizing practices are something that is becoming. And not just artists, you can maybe see it if you take a bit of time. You can see other people in other professions trying to do the same thing to try and get round the worst instances of. I mean, the most common one is downshifting, people leaving a city centre because it's too expensive and moving somewhere else. But the issue is that drives up house prices. That drives up house prices elsewhere, and then they have to move again. But that is the most common one, and I think that is something that is not really understood amongst artists. Is how can we make art without worrying about money? How can we do it in a way that everybody wins, but that we can? And that's something that I think we need to discuss and understand.
No, I think that's quite succinctly very complicated stuff put. I mean, a couple of things I'd come back to immediately. I mean, first of all, is the necessity of artists to get organised, and then for there to be a real debate and discussion about what we need to do. And also, once you start that, you just have to start thinking, well, what is an artist? Which group are we talking about here? Are we talking about pay to play for singer-songwriters, or are we talking about the cost of materials for stones carvers, for example? Which way do we tackle this question of living within capitalism and getting organised and fighting for the rights and the value of our labour, which I think is the point you were going. I mean, just a couple of sides. I haven't looked at any stuff for David Beach. Did you say spelled double E? Very interesting. Maybe I'll try and get him on the show, because we're due to have John Molyneux from who's written a very interesting book called Dialectics of Art, which I'm slowly going through. It's very interesting, and I got an agreement to do it ages ago, an interview with him. That will come eventually, but I have to finish the book first. So if John, you're listening, I'm very sorry. I'm very slow. I've got a lot on. And the one while we're naming people, the other one I did an interview quite a while. I did a double show with him, was Ben Davis. He's an art critic from New York, very interesting, wrote Art and Class 9.5, and he's doing a new book, and he's going to come on the show when he's done that. So we have thinkers, if you like, going on this, which I guess we're in there somewhere. I mean, you did a degree or
that's right. Yeah,
you studied into this a little bit. You've gone a bit further than read a couple of books, which is important, I think, because I think on the one hand we need to find a practical ways. Not only are we involved in historical memory, in the struggle of the street, in playing for a campaign. Not only are we activists separate from that, organising a meeting with nothing to do with art. We also, I didn't expect this interview necessarily to go this way, but it's where we've gone. We have to theorise on it as a little bit as well. Where have you gone with that? I mean, you've alluded already quite a lot of knowledge on it with your comments, but what was your studies about, and how are you continuing that?
So I studied contemporary art theory, and it's not necessarily theory about contemporary art. It's more sort of contemporary theory about art, if that makes sense. So, although it could, if you wanted to, if you were a student and you wanted to go there and you wanted to study theory about contemporary art, that would have been fine. So, if you're interested in doing a course like this, please go and do that. But the way I approached it can more or less be what you kind of. So, the idea of the course was whatever you submitted was sort of like your contribution to contemporary art theory. That was the sort of general idea. So more or less it could be what you want it to be, and to an extent, as long as it's backed up with something out there in the academic whatever, as long as it's not off the wall, as long as it could be grounded in some sort of debate, it could be whatever you wanted it to be. So I approached it from a Marxist angle, I suppose. That was there in all my work and all the reading I was doing, and there was quite a lot of left-wing sources, not necessarily Marxist sources, but there was quite a lot of left-wing sources to look at, a lot of left-wing debates around about things like the blockchain, NFTs, platforms, like the one we're using now, and who owns and controls these platforms and how they influence artists, things like Spotify, so how do they influence musicians, how do they influence artists, things like... no, not Etsy. What's the other one? It's gone. There's another one that's for for painters, and they take a massive cut of whatever's sold. And so that was a big part of the debate. But for me, just in the context of COVID and having been a musician myself, before starting the course and having watched having watched my career just vanish for 2020 in front of me, and being unable to do anything about it, and going around various different funds basically begging for cash just to get by, just thinking, what can we do as artists or theorists, whatever, philosophers, I suppose, in a word, intellectuals, what can people who are interested in art do to mitigate a crisis? We can't, obviously we're not sitting there like Mystic Meg with a ball trying to see what's coming, but what can we do so that when a crisis does come, people aren't forced into starvation? What can we do as artists to have an art economy that is not rooted in precarity, like in serious precarity, and being a freelancer, being an artist, we don't have patrons. Some people do, but we don't have very wealthy patrons who are going to see them through. So how can we organise that? What spaces do we need to make? What spaces exist, or what infrastructure exists already that we can utilise to make these spaces, to build an art economy? And that's really the road I went down with my studies, was how can we, in some of these alternative economising practices that I talked about, were part of my studies as well, and trying to look at ways in which we can utilise community-based wealth, and I mean money in this instance, and then try to generate a more ecological sort of socialist, not socialist necessarily, but more solidarity, at least solidarity to start with before socialism and all that, at least solidarity in communities to build up art scenes. And that's where I've been going. That's where I kind of went with my studies, and I was all the time thinking, what is the, what happened before? What parts of the art world before the pandemic do we want to keep? What parts are terrible, and what can we do to replace that? And actually, when I sort of started to look at these things, you can really see that outside of in Scotland anyway, I'm not 100% sure about elsewhere. I have an idea of other places in England and Germany and stuff, but in Scotland anyway, the major art infrastructures are rooted in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And there's some up in Dundee, a bit more in a bit further north still you'll find some in Aberdeen, but really outside of the major urban centres you'll struggle to find places to exhibit art, to even practice art, learn art, perform music. You'll struggle. And my thinking was, how can we build an art network that's how can we have an art scene where, because what you have right now is you have artists. There's a college just down the road from me here in Falkirk that's got an art and design class. Students that are learning at the college, they'll leave Falkirk and go and study in Edinburgh and Glasgow, or they'll go and study somewhere else. and then they're taking their art away from the town because there's nothing here to keep them here. Why would you stay? If you want to be an artist, this is not the place to stay, because there's nowhere to do your work. There's no one to sort of collaborate with, so you're at a loss. You have to move, and that's like a major problem, actually.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're touching on a lot of big things here. I mean, the nature of capital or capitalism in itself to draw things, all things money making to the centre. This is one problem, so it's like a localisation. The Solidarity Park project talks about in bringing the international to the local, and in amongst that, I don't know, what would you call it? It's a statement, let's say, is this idea of linking people together, but actually behind that there's something else going on, and it's a little bit what you're talking about. You're also talking about really about the class nature of things today in art, because I think it's safe to say that the art of generations maybe before the 50s, let's put it that way, artists were middle class, in general, and doesn't mean that people didn't do folklore and folk art. That's always existed, and generally is free. We talked about it at the top of the show about oral history, but what we're talking about here is popular culture has created a working class artist in a sense, and neoliberalism has had another effect on that, and issues like pay to play and art being maybe a way of earning a living, and the huge industries of music and these things. So the money's there, and they're happy to exploit the human creative spirit, but they're not happy for it to exist in its own right. It's something that's under the ground, and all that boils down to me that this is a labour movement issue.
I agree. Yeah, I do agree. Yeah.
And it also.
Sorry, on you go, Rob. Sorry, on you go.
No, I was on a rant, and you're the guest.
No, please.
Well,
I was just going to say, I think there's like in certain parts of the world and certain parts of the country there is almost like an oversupply of artistic labour, and that's part of the reason it could be so easily exploited, that you can get away. Venues feel like they can get away with giving you 60 quid or 80 quid to sing for 3 hours, because if you won't do it, somebody else will. And so your choice is either, okay, I take this money, or I don't play at all. That's the choice that they're leaving, and that's extreme precarity. I mean, we're seeing that sort of logic being expanded out of the art economy and into other parts of the economy, with the so-called gig economy, with so-called flexible working. You're some days they're Deliveroo driver by night and they're a DPD driver by day. That's the same sort of logic that's being taken out of the art world and expanded out into other parts of the economy. So for sure it's a labour movement issue. I mean, these are... Capitalism is looking for ways to expand its profit, looking around, in a way not unlike artists. Artists look around for ways to change their practice, to add to their practice. They look at what other artists are doing, they look at other parts of society to sort of that they could tap into, and capitalism's doing the same thing. It's looking at what other businesses are doing, what individuals might be doing, and trying to co-opt it, or just outright ripping off the idea. And somewhere some very clever person out in Silicon Valley has had the idea of expanding the art economy, the idea of gig work, into the actual economy, because it can generate millions and you don't have to pay very much. And this is for sure a labour movement issue.
There's also falseness with that as well, like creating cities of culture. I mean, they're not culture, and they bring in and they take away, sort of often cities where manufacturing is collapsed and the old economy's gone, and they bring in, build a fancy museum, which none of us get to show at, and none of us get to use, or they get some money for it, and then they do a razzmatazz of this, that, and the other, and there you are, the economy grows, and sometimes it has an effect. It's also connected to the gentrification of areas. We're often the first ones to come in and live in the shitholes and make them cool, and then the house prices go up, because we're there. I mean, that's a bit pompous from an artist's point of view, but it's kind of what happens.
But there's a bit of truth in it, there is a bit of truth in it,
So, I mean, I think the aloof artist does exist. We all have a bit of that about us, but actually it seems to boil down to me that it's a question of us needing to get organised and have these discussions as a group of workers, if you like. I don't know.
I think that's the key for something like Solidarity Park, because it's like a focal point for people to come, for artists to come to, but people as well to come to, because there are places that exist, or structures that exist. So there's unions, musicians unions, there's artist unions, but they're still not really cutting through. They're still not able to establish a base rate. They're still not able to collectively bargain, like say for instance Unite can go into a factory and collectively bargain a rate. The musicians union still hasn't got that ability to go into a venue or a chain and say this is the rate you pay. It can do that with orchestras, it could do that with studios, it could do that with some like, you know, maybe somewhere like the Royal Albert Hall perhaps. It could maybe do that, but it can't really go into a bar or a music venue and say this is the rate, this is what you have to pay. Whereas I think something like Solidarity Park, it brings it gives a focal point for artists to come to and debate and discuss things, and even just to see that you're not on your own. You know, that there is a network out there of artists who are trying to work, as you say, internationally, bringing it to the local. That's a fantastic ethos, and you know, it's something I always enjoy about going out and playing at gigs outside of Scotland, because you go. I mean, I've played with musicians from Ecuador, from Palestine, from Syria, from America, from Ireland, and most of these musicians all have, you know, we could sit down and say, oh, there was this one time I played this really shit gig and this happened, and then somebody else will say, oh, well, I played a really shit gig and this happened. We all have similar sort of experiences, and that's a really good starting point for organisation if you can establish something like that. And that's what's really good about a festival, especially a political one, because or particularly a political one, because it's a focal point for artists to come and network. Network, maybe not the right word, because it's usually meant entrepreneurship.
It's an interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, Solidarity Park. I mean, it was going to be my sort of final question to you about the International Brigades and anti-fascists and how we need to come together and how we need to work. And Solidarity Park has many different angles. Schools is particularly one, taking it to the young people. Artists is the other. You know, it's a community arts project, but not just in the local area. You know, it's a community arts project internationally, in recognising that is how we work. And there's the historical memory, and those are our three legs, as we call it. You know, our three sort of angles. But the festival idea, who knows where we're going to go with that? I mean, from my point of view, I mean, I'm obviously an important person in that project, but I'm rapidly becoming only one of the people, you know, and that's where the project's going, because it can't go any further with that sort of thing. So it's starting to take a different life. One of the things I would argue for is the networking and actual organising of artists. That's also what this podcast is about, you know, and maybe the podcast is more about that than the Solidarity Park project. And I think it is important that we do that we have these discussions, but actually we probably need to take it a step further. But maybe to round off the podcast, rather, you know, I'd like to get your sort of feedback on the question of the brigaders, the importance to you, and the anti-fascist work that you think we maybe need to do today.
I think the thing for the brigaders for me is, I think sometimes there's a tendency, and it maybe just comes from the position that the Labour movement finds itself in, which is a very difficult one that's it's been defeated quite a lot on quite heavy things, and I think there's a tendency to sort of lament the International Brigades sometimes, to sort of set it out as a tragedy. And obviously it was tragic, but I think we need to celebrate the International Brigades, need to celebrate what they achieved, which was they were betrayed by the so-called allied forces of Britain and France and the US. They were betrayed, and they had to stand and watch as the fascist powers destroyed Spain. But they achieved something which is a monumental achievement, because it was just individual working class people, individual working class organisations, not just communist parties, not just anarchist syndicates or whatever, but trade unions, whole civil society organisations came together and pulled together an international response to a massive crisis. I mean, that's something that's lost as well. The war in Spain came from a crisis. It didn't just come because a few fascists got disgruntled. It was a massive crisis that happened, that caused the war, and the response to that should be celebrated. I think it is celebrated. I mean, maybe I was a bit unfair at first, but I think sometimes there is a tendency to say how tragic was this, and I think we need to celebrate it and celebrate and always celebrate that, because that's the signal, and that's the salient point of the International Brigades. It wasn't organised by a nation. It wasn't organised by a higher being or a higher power. It was, sort of, I guess if you like, grassroots working class people who came together on an international scale. Something like 3,000 Scots left very poor conditions in Scotland to come to Spain to fight against fascism, because they knew it would eventually come to the UK, or it would be a world war. And that's something we have to celebrate. And when you put it in the context of COVID, and you put it in the context of today's fascism and far-right conspiracy theories, there's clearly a need for an international response to both of these things. It's no good, here, let's just think about COVID. Here in the UK, everybody's going crazy to try and get a booster jab. I would obviously recommend people go and get a booster jab, but even if we manage to snuff out COVID here, it's still raging somewhere else. So there has to still be an international response to snuff it out elsewhere. And that's something that, okay, then COVID and war are not the same thing, but that idea of internationalism to combat a threat is something that the International Brigades is always a massive inspiration for, a massive example of what can be achieved by everyday people in trying to combat threats, like international threats. And in terms of today's fascism, people like Trump, people not necessarily like Boris Johnson, but the people who are propping him up, very wealthy, very powerful people, not unlike the fascists in Spain. These people can be defeated if we organise internationally. I mean, that's until the Hitlerites and Mussolini got involved, Franco was facing a humiliation, and until they got involved, and until the Allies betrayed the International Brigades, Franco was facing a humiliation, and that's the standout thing, is ordinary working class people can achieve things, great things, and that's really something for me that I always find inspiring about the International Brigades. And there's dozens of stories, more than that, stories of individuals like Charlie Donnelly and from Ireland, and what they brought to the struggle, and what their memory represents in Ireland today, and the struggle there. And it's not just the struggle in Spain, it's how that has how the memory of that has inspired struggles today, and keeps people going. I've got friends in Ireland who are members of who organise the Friends of the International Brigades of Ireland. They come to Madrid every year. They organise events in Ireland to commemorate the International Brigades. But it's not just about the internet. It's not just about commemorating people like Charlie Donnelly. It's commemorating that, but it's also saying, if we don't fight for fascism today, then they died for nothing. Yeah. And that's the. I think that's the major. Those are the two major things: is what can we do internationally? What can the International Brigades teach us? And then two, fighting fascism today. You're not just fighting it for yourself as somebody on the left, and for your neighbour and for your community, but you're fighting for the people who died. You're fighting for their memory. It's out of their respect, because ultimately it is a waste if we lose the world to fascism at any point in history. It doesn't matter. It is a waste of people who have given up their lives fighting against it. And actually, I read a fantastic book. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it kind of, I guess, brings us round back full circle between art and culture. I read a fantastic book which you can get on Pluto Press. Again, it's called Cultural Politics, and it's by Christopher Caldwell. who was an international brigadier who died in the Civil War in Spain. He's a fantastic art theoretician, art critic. Probably not the be-all and end-all. There's probably some things people might read and think, I don't think that's right, but he's fantastic. And he was a great loss at his time, but his work carries on, his ideas carry on, and that's something as well. But the International Brigades is the ideas and the work is still there. It's still represented, and it still needs to be understood. And things like Solidarity Park, people like the Friends of the International Brigades of Ireland, International Brigades Memorial Trust here in the UK, they do a great job of keeping that alive and trying to explain the value of the International Brigades and what we can take from it today.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Calum. I think that's been a really interesting interview, and we hope to look forward to seeing you very soon. So take good care.
That'd be great.
And
you too, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no worries at all, mate. Bye now.
Bye. Cheers, mate.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have something to say to us, then join our Facebook group or contact us at outaspace.com. That's outa-space.com. See you soon.